I have to ask about something that we've been hearing a lot about. Tell us about your logo.
Thank you actually for bringing this up because I think it is something that needs to be addressed. So my journey to run for Congress actually started in July of 2024. I originally reached out to a consulting firm to discuss a potential state rep position and running for state rep. And the reason that I did that is I realized there's a lot of infrastructure issues that were around, and there were a lot of people that were upset with leadership. So I went and got vetted. They came back and said, we want you to run for U.S. Congress. And at first that was a crazy thought. I didn't envision myself ever running for public office that way. So that started in July of 2024. And that was at the peak of election season, right? People are dumping stuff. You got the primaries going on. So I kind of watched how that played out. On October 26th, I reached out to a graphic designer, a local graphic designer who I'd done work with before. And I said, I have 5 demands that I want you to have. I said, I need Justin Michael for Congress. I need an outline of our congressional district. I need a Bridging the Divides slogan, first congressional district, and I need the Mackinac Bridge. Those were my 5 demands that I needed in an email. I said, you can be creative as you want. I trust you. Why don't you throw me some stuff? So on October 28th, she sends her first renditions back. And it was a good start. November 1st, I fire back some of my corrections. I said, I think we should do this. We should change this. And we're going back and forth, and I'm sending her updates. And I was really having a hard time figuring out how to place the Mackinac Bridge it's a huge bridge. It's noticeable. But the bridge is there for a few reasons. One, it's a symbol of American innovation, but especially in our district. The bridge was completed in 1957. And at that time was the largest suspension bridge that was built in the world. But the other interesting thing about that is it was the year that my mom was born. And my mom is deathly afraid of heights. And if you've ever driven over the Mackinac Bridge, there's actually grates in the center lanes, and you can see down as you're going over the bridge. And it's kind of terrifying for people who are afraid of heights. And there's stories of people getting blown off the Mackinac Bridge. And my mom, as terrified as she was, the first thing she'd say is we'd pull up, she'd go, the Mackinac Bridge, it was completed the year that I was born. So it was really important for me to put the Mackinac Bridge in my logo because the symbology that it had with my mom and the experiences that I had going to the Upper Peninsula, and every time my mom explaining it to me as if I'd heard it for the first time. So as we started getting it back and forth, on November 6th, so the day after the election, we had our logo completed. And the hardest part was actually integrating the bridge into my name, making it the H, because I wanted it to be from the right side, because that's the view you get when you leave the port on the ferry and you go to the Mackinac Bridge and you see it, plus being right. The district being red, I made sure it was district. And people said, well, why don't you put the rest of Michigan in there? And I love the state of Michigan, but they can handle their own business. I'm really focused on our first congressional district. And it's a really unique outline. And anyone that's from northern Michigan or the Upper Peninsula can look at that and say, I know exactly where that is. So that was something that I really cared about. So we had this logo created, done, and that's when you start your exploratory committee. You start asking people. So you start sending up stuff. What do you think about this? Is there any support in the district for me? Could you see me running for Congress? Can we raise some money maybe? What can we do to get this exploratory committee moving forward? And then January 9th, my buddy sends me a photo. And he said, look at what I just got from the guy that you're running against. And sure enough, and we'll show it on the screen, a side-by-side comparison, nearly identical to my logo. So as you can see here, some similarities. The color schemes are quite similar, the same concept of Michigan's first district, although they didn't put the district in there anymore, which is interesting because historically, if we look at his logos, it's got the entire state of Michigan in it. But one thing that I thought was really interesting was his addition of the bridge in his name. Now, if you were to read that, it looks like Jack Bergman or Jack Berghan. Berghan. Yeah, you see Jack Berghan?
I see Jack Bergman.
Yeah, Jack Bergman. Okay, perfect. He did put his 3-star Google review on there, which I thought was pretty interesting. But yeah, so I found it to be interesting. And at first I was really upset, right? It's like, why would you're sitting congressman. This is pretty petty. And I get it from a marketing standpoint. You know, maybe he wants to confuse voters. And that has been the case. I actually had a voter come up to me and say, are you working with him? Why are your logos so similar? But I'll tell you what was the worst part about this. And I think that this goes to speak volumes. When I called the girl who spent 40 some hours of her time working on this logo, and overall for the brand book, about 100 hours. Okay. When I called her and I sent her the photo, her reaction hurt my heart. She was, what did I do wrong? I'm so sorry, Justin. Do we need to change your logo? And I said, absolutely not. She's like, are we going to get in trouble? Did I copy something? I said, no, listen, you didn't do anything wrong. She was in tears. And that hurt me. And she said, well, what are we going to do? I said, we're going to defend ourselves. We're going to keep going forward. And she's like, are you concerned about it? I said, no. If I'm not willing to stand up for stuff that we created, then I'm not willing to be a leader in this congressional district. And I'll tell you something interesting. And this was one of my friends sent me a quote from Oscar Wilde that said, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And that just kind of made me realize that I must be on the right track, because if you're going to copy our logo and you're going to follow us around the district, then you're concerned. If you go right now to his website, and we're plus 6 months from when this was launched. If you go to his congressional website, you'll see that logo. But if you go to his Bergman for Congress website, you'll notice that they haven't changed his old logo. And that just tells you how disconnected they are, how their branding methods. There's never been in the history of a company, when you do a rebrand, they don't leave multiple logos out there for people to get confused. When you do a rebrand for Ford, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, as soon as they put it out, everything has it. Right. And so it just goes to show you that this wasn't their intent to rebrand. It was something that they did after the fact.